No one on that quiet Russian railway line knew it yet, but within the next 7 minutes, the sky above them would explode. A supply train carrying thousands of liters of fuel would turn into a river of fire, a steel bridge would collapse under its own melting weight, and Russia's most secure logistics corridor would be shut down by just 2 silent Ukrainian drones. This is the story of the night a single drone strike rippled through an entire war. The night was cold and unusually still. A thin layer of fog drifted across the vast Russian countryside, blurring the shape of the tracks that cut through the dark fields. Far in the distance, the rhythmic rumble of a heavily loaded freight train echoed, getting louder with each passing second. It was a familiar sound, nothing extraordinary, nothing alarming. But hidden in the darkness above, something was watching. Hundreds of miles away, in a small Ukrainian military operations room, 4 drone operators leaned over their screens, their faces lit by the faint blue glow of thermal cameras. They were calm, focused, and silent. A mission like this didn't require force, it required precision. Target train movement confirmed, one operator whispered into his headset. Speed consistent. No escort. Route unchanged. Another operator zoomed in on the white heat signature moving along the tracks. Fuel wagons, multiple, this is it. Mission time. The operators exchanged no unnecessary words. They all knew what striking this specific train meant. Russia depended heavily on its railway system, it was the backbone of its war logistics. Ammunition, vehicles, artillery shells, fuel, food, medical supplies, everything moved on rails. And tonight's target was not just any supply train. Intelligence had confirmed it was a high-volume fuel convoy headed toward a forward military district, supplying tank battalions and artillery groups preparing for an offensive. Disrupting this single train could freeze an entire sector of the front. Drone 1 began its silent ascent from an improvised Ukrainian launch point. Its electric motor buzzed faintly, then vanished into the night as the drone rose higher and higher. Once at altitude, the autopilot took over, guiding it across the border on a pre-programmed route. The operator switched the drone into silent glide mode. Now it was nothing more than a shadow moving through the sky, lightless, soundless, invisible. Russia, on the other hand, was asleep at the wheel. In a railway control room miles away, operators casually monitored screens that showed nothing unusual. A few green dots representing freight trains slowly moved across the grid. One of them, train 904K, was the target. But to the Russians, it was just another routine shipment. Nothing seemed wrong. Nothing seemed dangerous. Until it was too late. Drone 1 drifted steadily toward the tracks. From its camera feed, the long line of fuel wagons stretched like a metallic serpent across the landscape. The operator's voice remained steady. Distance 14 kilometers, confirming wind, switching to attack trajectory. At the same time, Drone 2, armed with a second warhead, moved into position from another direction. Both drones were modified FPV kamikaze platforms, long-range and customized to detonate with maximum effect on fuel targets. The train approached a small steel bridge, a spot chosen for a very specific reason. If the strike happened on the bridge, the blast force would multiply. Fire would spread downward, structural damage would double, and recovery would be nearly impossible. The moment was coming. The train's engineer blew the horn as he approached the bridge, thinking nothing of it. Inside the cabin, the driver and assistant talked casually. They didn't know an attack was coming. They didn't even know a drone was above them. Drone 1 locked its target. Altitude dropped. Speed increased. The operator whispered, impact in 5 seconds. Maintain glide. The drone went into a full power dive. The fuel wagons enlarged on the screen, then filled the frame, then a gigantic flash lit up the night. The explosion was instant and violent. A fireball shot upward, turning the fog into a glowing orange cloud. The first tanker wagon ruptured like a pressurized balloon, its interior fuel turning into an airborne inferno. The shockwave ripped through the entire length of the train. Wagon after wagon exploded like a chain reaction of firecrackers, except each blast was the size of a small bomb. Emergency alarms began screaming inside the Russian control room. Red lights flashed on the monitors. We lost contact with freight 904K. An operator shouted. What happened? Report. The supervisor demanded. Impact detected. Possible derailment. System error. But this wasn't a system error. It was just the beginning. Drone 2 had seen everything from above. The fire was so massive that even the drone's thermal camera was nearly blinded by the heat bloom rising from the tracks. The operator watched calmly. Going for the engine. Confirmed second objective. He pushed the joystick forward. Drone 2 descended rapidly, cutting through the rising smoke, heading straight for the crippled locomotive. The engineer had slammed the brakes, but the train's wheels screeched helplessly as the fire raced toward the front. The drone locked onto the engine block. The operator exhaled. Strike. Drone 2 smashed into the locomotive with a deep, thundering boom. The engine tore apart, metal fragments shooting in every direction. The front section of the train lifted off the tracks, landed sideways, and burst into flames. The entire railway line had become a river of fire. Flames crawled along the spilled fuel, spreading across the bridge, down into the shallow water below, and then back up onto the tracks. Smoke climbed high into the sky, visible for miles. Russia's emergency units were dispatched, but it took them more than 12 minutes to reach the site, 12 minutes of uncontrolled fire. By the time the first fire trucks arrived, the bridge was collapsing, steel beams glowing red from heat. Nothing could be saved. Nothing could be repaired quickly. Ukraine's operators watched the mission feed quietly. Target neutralized, one said. Logistics corridor offline, another confirmed. But the true impact of the strike was far greater than a destroyed train. The next morning, Russian military command held an emergency briefing. Maps were spread across tables. Logistics officers looked rattled. One colonel slammed his fist on the desk. If this continues, our entire rail network is at risk. Another officer argued, that route was considered safe, deep inside Russian territory. How did they reach it? A general responded, drones don't need permission. They just need a gap. Ukraine had found that gap. And exploited it perfectly. Satellite images released later showed the scale of destruction. A melted bridge, derailed wagons piled like crushed aluminum cans, scorched earth stretching for hundreds of meters. Russia publicly called it a railway accident. But no one believed that. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, the strike had immediate consequences. Russian frontline units waiting for fuel saw their deliveries delayed indefinitely. Tank movements slowed. Artillery units rationed their diesel stocks. Convoys were forced to reroute through longer, vulnerable paths. Ukraine's counter-battery teams noticed the change instantly. A Ukrainian brigade commander said in a briefing, their tempo dropped. Their artillery is silent in sectors where it used to be constant. One drone strike had weakened an entire front line. This was the new era of warfare, where small unmanned aircraft could achieve what airstrikes, missiles, or full battalions sometimes couldn't. Quiet, precise, devastating. The footage of the burning train went viral online. Locals miles away recorded the enormous fireball lighting up the night sky. Some said they thought a factory had exploded. Others said it looked like a plane crash. No one suspected drones, not until officials reluctantly confirmed it days later. For Ukraine's drone operators, it was just another night. They packed their equipment, logged the mission results, and walked out of the operations room. They knew this wasn't the last strike. Because as long as Russia relied on its vast railway network, as long as trains kept carrying fuel and weapons to the front, as long as silent drones could cross borders undetected, there would always be another target. Another mission. Another night when the sky would explode without warning. The war had entered a new phase. A phase where the most powerful weapon wasn't the tank, the jet, or the missile. It was the drone. Small, portable, cheap, deadly. And on that dark railway line, where flames still smoldered and steel still hissed from the heat, Russia learned a painful truth. It doesn't matter how big your army is. If your supply line can be destroyed by something you never even heard coming. This is the new reality of modern warfare. And it all began with one silent drone. And one burning train.